Everybody doing? Last day of January. Obviously, there's a big game on Sunday, and everybody will be watching that. I'll be excited to watch it. I'll share with you guys my pick later on in the segment. But I just want to come on and talk to you guys about whatever you want to talk about. Anything, all things Titans, all things NFL. Take a bit of your questions and just kind of give an update on where the Titans are in the coaching search and what's next. As always, you guys can check out my work on ESPN.com. Check out the articles I have posted up. I talked about yesterday. I talked about the defensive coordinator hire and Dean Pease and what I thought about that. And this morning I talked about Matt LaFleur and what you could expect from him from the offensive coordinator position. So I think both of those hires are strong hires from what I've seen so far. You can read what I wrote earlier, kind of give a summary of what my overall thoughts are on the move. But I think that Mike Vrabel's staff is off and rolling. I know there was some worry early on was he getting the right guys? Was he fully getting the people that he needs to move forward? But I think right now it's January. We won't be able to see how they perform until they're out in the field. But on paper, these look like strong hires to me, particularly the LaFleur hire. A guy that I think will really help Marcus Mariota. So I will talk a little bit about the coaches. The Titans just announced 7 more coaches they're adding to their assistant coach roster. I reported some of them before, but some of the big names that you want to know is the Pat O'Hara hire, which we talked about earlier, but he's the quarterback's coach, the guy that will be working with Marcus Mariota directly. And he's a guy who came from Houston, worked with Deshaun Watson, but most notably, he's worked in Hollywood with a lot of actors, Adam Sandler and The Rock, and also he's been an Arena League coach and coordinator. So he'll be Marcus Mariota's direct contact on a day-to-day basis, as well as Matt LaFleur. And those two, along with Vrabel, will have a big impact on Marcus Mariota's development in year 4. And obviously, that is going to play a huge role in how the Titans do and perform in 2018 season and what's going to be a really competitive AFC South race. So I'll talk more about the coaching search as we get along. As always, I'll answer your questions. We'll kind of bounce back and forth. Sometimes I'll go on tangents. Sometimes I'll answer your questions. So let's go ahead and hop to some of the questions now, and I'll talk about whatever you guys want to talk about. Hugo, what's up, man? How you doing? Michael, do you think the Titans will spend much money on the free agency with the contracts of Lewan and Mariota coming up? The Titans are in good position as far as their cap room. As we all know, John Robinson has really made his mark as being an aggressive general manager in his first 2 years here in Tennessee, and I expect him to be aggressive again this offseason. They're really in a position where they can make moves via free agency, via trade, and via extending their own players. And I think we'll see a mixture of all 3 of those things. Like you mentioned, Lewan, I think, will be a big priority. I actually asked John Robinson about that in the Senior Bowl, and he sort of gave me the answer that all general managers sort of give and say that, okay, he's under contract right now, and that's all I can tell you. They did exercise their 5th-year option, so he'll be a Titan in 2018 regardless of what happens. But I think there will be some talks about extending Lewan. He's a elite left tackle in the league, and he'll probably want highest paid left tackle in the NFL money. And the good news for the Titans is they had that money. So I'm sure there will be some back and forth with Taylor Lewan's agent and John Robinson. And as a Titans fan, you hope they can come to some sort of agreement to pay him and keep him in a Tennessee Titans uniform for several years to come. I think he's a guy you want anchoring Marcus Mariota's blind side. As far as Mariota, he just finished his 3rd year in contract. I don't think they'll be in any rush. I don't know why it would make sense from Mariota's standpoint to rush this sort of deal. He didn't have his best season last season, so I don't think that he's going to come in and say, "Hey, I want to get paid right now," because right now, honestly, he wouldn't be at his highest market value. So, in my opinion, I think that they extend the 5th-year option some point this offseason, and then they let him play out his 4th year. And maybe next offseason they give him that mega deal if he has that bounce back year that everybody expects. So I think you have every reason to believe that he's the franchise quarterback here, but I don't know if they're going to necessarily rush that one. Taylor Lewan, I think that gets done at some point this offseason, but that's just my opinion. And then as far as free agency, I do think they'll be aggressive in trying to make some moves, whether it's a guard, whether it's a pass rusher, whether it's making a trade to get some more explosive players on offense. I think that that's the type of free agency period we'll see. Maybe they aren't the biggest sellers, like the biggest buyers, like the Cleveland Browns, but I think they'll be in play. Let's see what we got here. Hugo, opinion on the new coaches. I want to meet them first. At some point, we're going to have a press conference, I believe. I'm not certain about that, but I believe sometime after the Super Bowl, there's a good chance that they talk, whether we do that then or whether it's closer to April, we'll see. But I'm thinking, there's a good chance that it'll be coming soon. And hopefully we'll get to meet the coordinators so I can shake their hands, sort of get a vibe on what their philosophy is. I'm pretty sure it's going to be aligned with what Mike Vrabel and John Robinson have been talking to us about all offseason, and that is being tough, being physical, being maximizing the talent of Marcus Mariota and the offensive skill set. So I think all those things will be huge. I'm really eager to see what Matt LaFleur has to say. I've talked to several people who have worked with him on different levels, whether reporters, people who know him as far as front office execs, and people who have coached under him, and they are really excited about his ability to get this role, to ability to call plays, and ability to be in a position with Marcus Mariota to get the most out of him. So I wrote a story earlier today that I think he can be unleashed. Marcus Mariota can be unleashed under Matt LaFleur, and that will be something that I know Titans fans are eager to see. I think we'll see a lot more of a spread out offense. I think you'll see a mix of combinations of his past influences. He's worked under Gary Kubiak in Houston. He's worked under both Shanahan's, Kyle and Mike. And he's worked most recently under Sean McVay. So I don't think it'll be exactly like the Rams offense, but I do think that you'll see a lot of the Ram element, play action in particular. That was an area where Jared Goff was really effective with the Rams. He led the NFL in yards off play action. And if you guys have been tuning in to these, you know how much I love play action Mariota, and his use wasn't to the element that it should have been last year under Malarkey. They were 16th in play action use. So I think we'll see a lot more of play action Mariota in 2018 and up-tempo Mariota in 2018, which are both good signs if he performs how he did in 2017 in both of those areas. As far as Dean Pease, he is a very experienced coach, a guy who coached Mike Vrabel when he was a player, and that's someone that Vrabel is going to be able to lean on as an experienced mentor, a guy who is going to shape up to be a up-and-coming young staff from what we've seen so far. They've made about 9 or 10 hires, and all of those are sort of leaning toward the up-and-coming guys, and that's fine. But you do need, in my opinion, 1 or 2 really experienced guys who can be your rock when things go wrong, so to speak. And I think that's what Dean Pease is going to be for Mike Vrabel. And I think it's important that he has the philosophy that Mike Vrabel has. I think that the 3-4 system will still be alive here. I think Mike Vrabel talked about the front multiplicity and coverage consistency as his overall sort of theme he's going to preach to his coaches. But I do think that we'll see a lot of the 3-4 elements, but we will see a more aggressive play calling out of Dean Pease. That's sort of been his staple in Baltimore. And he's had 6 top 10 defenses in his 10 years as coordinator in both New England and Baltimore. So I think that's something to be excited about. I'm a little curious on why Dean Pease versus just not keeping Dick LeBeau, but I think some of that has to do with just getting your own guy in there. And then ultimately they've been trying to stress turnovers, and that's something that the Ravens did really well under Pease. They led the NFL in takeaways last season, and they had 6 defensive touchdowns last season, 6. The Titans had just 2 in the last 2 seasons. So I think that's something that if the Titans can do better in both of those areas, then you can have a defense that already has some talent really emerge into maybe a top 10 defense. And that's something that could lift them from maybe a divisional round team to competing to be maybe an AFC championship team and maybe even a Super Bowl team. And they could be playing on this weekend. And I could be up in Atlanta next year talking to you guys about a Super Bowl. And Just talking about another coaching search, hopefully. But I think there's good reason to be excited about both of those coordinator positions. I don't know a lot about the staff members he's bringing in. I do think that this is going to be a young bunch, an excitable bunch, and I think that I'm excited to get to know these guys. I think that there's some bittersweetness losing a lot of the old coaches on the regime. No defensive coaches from Mike Mularkey's staff will be coming back, and a lot of those guys I think were really good coaches, like Deshae Townsend. You got guys like your Deshae Townsend, Steve Jackson, the assistant DB coach, Keith Willis, the assistant D line coach. Those guys were really good coaches, but in this business, things change over. So I'm excited to see how they do under this new staff. So that's sort of a long-winded answer on how I think about the coaches. I'll be talking more about these coaches as we go along, try to give you more insight on who these guys are and how they can help these players get to the next level. But if you're looking now, please check out ESPN.com and check out my take on the early hires of Dean Pease. That story was written yesterday, and the hire of Matt LaFleur, and that story posted this morning. So check those out. Let's see what else we got. Justin, how much do you think the new OC will help animate progress? I just talked about it a little bit there, a long-winded response, so I'm just catching up there. Let me scroll through some different questions, and I may circle back to that one. Brian Moore, when is the soonest they could steal Fowler from the Steelers since he's only a futures contract there? I know you guys like Justin Fowler a lot. He's a Seahawk right now. Usually future deals are 2 seasons. They're non-guaranteed contracts, so I don't know if they would be interested in him, honestly. I haven't talked a lot to Vrabel about whether he plans to have a fullback in his system. If so, maybe there's some interest in reuniting if Justin doesn't make the Seahawks roster. But I think right now it's too early to talk about that sort of thing. I think that may happen in camp if a guy gets cut or not. But we'll quickly see whether fullback is a part of Mike Vrabel's system or more realistically Matt LaFleur's system. But I think the key move as far as the running back roster will be seeing what happens with, one, DeMarco Murray, and then two, if DeMarco Murray does move on and they move on from DeMarco Murray, what do they do as far as that backfield? The Rams under Sean McVay and Matt LaFleur used Todd Gurley quite a bit as a running and a receiving back. And the one question, or one of a couple questions about Derrick Henry, is how he can hold up as a 3-down back as far as a receiver and a pass blocker. Does that mean that the Titans need to go out and get a second receiving back to be that complement to Derrick Henry? And I think there's a decent chance they will. It's not a knock on Derrick Henry, but just this day and age, you have to have a guy who specializes as a receiving back. So it doesn't mean that Derrick Henry won't still be the lead back, but I think that there's a good chance that they go out there and try to find a guy that can be their screen guy, their guy who can be a Deion Lewis, might be Deion Lewis, a Jerick McKinnon, a Tevin Coleman, these guys that have been really effective and maybe a secondary role, but can be a versatile back as far as a receiver and a runner. We'll see a lot of versatility. You'll hear me talk a lot about versatility under Mike Vrabel's staff over the next couple of weeks. I think that's something that he preaches a lot, and that's something you'll see in your players. I think you'll see a lot of hybrid players, a lot of guys doing multiple roles, and that's how they'll sign free agents, and that's how they'll draft players going forward. So a little preview on something I may be talking about in the next couple of months, but I think those things will be important. Let's see what we got. Josh, so with the surgery on Blake Bortles' wrist, the Jags are now locked into him, meaning it looks like they're keeping him. Yeah, I saw that. I mean, it depends on if he's healthy enough by the physical. I think it's usually the 5th day or 3rd day, or maybe even the 1st day of the league year, which is in early March, when those 5th-year options become guaranteed. That'll be the case for Lewan and for Blake Bortles. I don't think you have to worry about anything as far as the Titans. They're not cutting Taylor Lewan. But as far as the Jags, I saw some of the reports that saying they're planning to go with Blake Bortles going forward. So in my opinion, that's good news for Titans fans. I just don't think that Blake Bortles is a quarterback that can win a Super Bowl for you. I don't think he played poorly this offseason, this playoff run. I think he actually played better than I expected. But if Blake Bortles is the Jags quarterback, I think that's good news for the Titans and the Titans fan base going forward, because that Jags team is special. They got a really special defense, and I think they're a quarterback away. And I think Blake Bortles is not that quarterback. So if they don't make any upgrades, if they go with Blake Bortles a fifth year, I think the Titans have that's good news for the Titans and their chances of winning the AFC South. Josh, Garden for agency, there's a bunch coming up. Yes, there is. And I love the idea of the Titans signing a top-notch guard in free agency. The problem is everybody wants a top-notch guard in free agency, and they're going to get paid. The top one on the market is Andrew Norwell from Carolina, and he is a top 5 guard in the NFL, and he's going to get paid like a tackle. And that's something where John Robinson is going to have to ask himself, is this a position we want to value? And typically New England hasn't valued guard positions, so it will be intriguing to see where John Robinson fits in that. He spent most of his career in New England, so I'm not sure how that philosophy is as far as his opinion. But if it's the same as New England, then maybe he goes on the mid-tier guys, or maybe he tries to draft a guard and goes that route, because it's a position that it's not a left tackle importance. It's not a quarterback importance. It's not a pass rusher importance, but it's a position where if you want to run the football, if you want to be able to get interior pressure away from Mariota, and that's one area where Mariota really struggled in the 2017 season, is reading interior pressure and moving too quickly when he got pressure in the middle. Then you want to upgrade that guard position, and that's an area where I know it's the exotic smash mouth offense, but you look at what went wrong with the 2017 Titans offense, and along with Mariota's struggles, their run game took a huge step back. They were third in the NFL in rushing in 2016-17 season, and they fell back to middle of the pack last season. And you have probably a top 10 on paper offensive line, but your weakness is at that guard position. So I would like to see them put serious resources in a guard, maybe 2, whether that's in free agency or the draft, but it will be up to John Robinson to see how he values that position. Lewis, DeMarco gone this season. We will see. Everything the Titans have been saying is just sort of he's under contract. I wrote earlier this year, I think there's a decent chance that we've seen the last of DeMarco Murray, excuse me, guys, in a Titans uniform. And I do think that he's getting older. He'll be 30 by the time next season, next season. And, you know, it's Derrick Henry's it's time to give Derrick Henry the boat. I don't think it's your third year for Derrick Henry. You got to either hand him the keys or say he's not going to ever be your feature back. So none of DeMarco Murray's contract is guaranteed, and he's a guy scheduled to make around $6.5 million. So that's not money for a backup running back. Maybe they talk about a restructure, but I think if I were the Titans, or just sort of kind of peeking into what I believe the Titans may do, I think there's a decent chance they go ahead and cut DeMarco Murray and try to find them another running back to add into that backfield to complement Derrick Henry. What are your thoughts on Malik Jefferson from University of Texas? I believe he's an upgrade over Williamson, who's a free agency. I'll be honest, I haven't dove deep into draft coverage yet. We had a playoff run and then a coaching search, so I haven't done as much film work as I would have liked by this point. I have watched Malik Jefferson live in Texas games. I'm a college football fan, so I've seen him, and he flashes. And that's what I look for when I watch players. Does he flash, and does he flash consistently? And he's a guy who flashed. The question is the consistency. I know that he was a really talented player coming out of high school. I think that he's going to be a first or second round pick in this league. And I do think the Titans should prioritize linebackers as far as edge rushers and inside linebackers in the draft. And that becomes even more important with Dean Pease as defensive coordinator. His Baltimore defense has always valued linebackers, all 4 of those positions. So I think you see the Titans making leaps as far as multiple linebacker positions. I think you could see as many as 2 or 3 additional starting caliber linebackers in the Titans roster coming in next season. So is Malik Jackson one of them? Maybe. Maybe he could be. He could be there as a first round pick. He could be there as a second round pick. So I think he definitely has to be under consideration. It's hard for me to position draft prospects without seeing how the Titans do in free agency. I usually like to see what they do in free agency first, because typically teams fill their needs in free agency first. And then you say, okay, what can we choose? Can we truly go best player available, or do we have to go best player available at a position of need, or do we have to go strictly need? And that will be dependent on what the Titans do in free agency. So that's sort of my answer to that. I gave my opinion on the new OC in DC a little earlier. More optimism for next year than I did last year. I think there is some feel about that in the Titans fan base, although there was a lot of optimism about the Titans coming into this previous season. If you guys remember right, at least from ESPN, there was a lot of people that picked them as far as the sleeper, hot team. And so to speak, they did make their run, but it wasn't as pretty as a lot of people wanted, and the offense wasn't explosive as a lot of people thought. So that's ultimately what ended up getting Mike Mularkey fired. So I think that there is some optimism. One thing that we'll have to not be careful of, but it'll be intriguing to see over the next few months, is how they handle these expectations, because they just made it to the divisional round of playoffs. And it was a very sort of negative run. Everybody was talking about how bad the Titans looked, and they still made it to the divisional playoffs. So you come into this season with a new coach, a new offensive coordinator who's supposed to get the most out of Marcus Mariota. What would be considered a successful year? And that's going to be something that I try to dive into over the next few months. Can you consider this a successful year if the Titans don't at least make it to where they got last season, which was a divisional round of the playoffs? And I think it'll be hard-pressed to do so. Even if you see jumps offensively, it's a game about winning and a game about making progression. And if they don't make it to the playoffs, or if they lose in the first round of the playoffs, I don't know how you can consider that a success. So there's a lot of pressure on Mike Vrabel as a first-year head coach. There's a lot of pressure on general manager John Robinson. But their early moves had given reason for optimism for the Titans fan base and for this team going forward. So that's sort of my take. What are the best options for a scat back to catch screens and compliment Henry, free agent, and the best draft pickup? I threw out a couple names earlier. I'll talk briefly about names, and we'll get probably more into that in February when I look at free agency preview. But Dion Lewis, who's scheduled to be a free agent in New England, you'll see him on Sunday. I think he would be a really good fit in this offense. If Philadelphia doesn't decide to bring in Darren Sproles, I think he could be a really good fit if you want to get a guy for 1 or 2 years. Jerick McKinnon from the Vikings, I think he could be a guy who could be a really good fit as far as a back splitting with Derrick Henry. And maybe if you can pry Tevin Coleman via trade. He has 1 year left on his deal. Atlanta just signed a big deal for Devontae Freeman. But I think I would be interested in a guy like that as well. As far as the draft, there's plenty of guys out there. Sony Michel out of Georgia interests me. John Kelly, I know Tennessee's had a run on backs, and I loved Alvin Kamara last season. But I think John Kelly is a guy who's going to be underrated in this draft process. And he could be a local guy, a UT guy who could fit well opposite Derrick Henry as well. So let's see. Not meeting any of these guys seems thorough. Yeah, he got a mixture of a few college guys, a few guys that he knew back in from Houston. As far as Vrabel, he got a few guys that are effective throughout the league. As far as Matt LaFleur, that really has John Robinson's hands all over it. It was a guy who was a candidate for a head coaching job, and you got him to take your offensive coordinator job, which was quote unquote a lateral move, but it was a move where he got play calling responsibilities. I think that was a monster get. I didn't know if they were going to be able to convince him to come. I'm sure there were some monetary perks that allowed him to come, but that was a big move. So I do think there's some diversity throughout the staff. I'll be interested to see how they sort of handle the experience element of that. I asked Mike Vrabel about that in his intro press conference, and he said that experience in itself is not important. Valuable experience is what he looks for. So I think you had that in Dean Pease. Do they need another older guy maybe on the offensive side of the ball? That's something that I may be a little bit curious about. You've got a guy like Matt LaFleur, who's a first-time play caller. And then you've got a bunch of other guys who sort of haven't really had a play call experience? Do you need a secondary former play caller on that staff, whether it's your running back coach or your offensive line coach? Those are two positions that haven't been filled yet on the offensive side of the ball. So I would love to see maybe a former play caller as your running back coach or your O-line coach, maybe give him an assistant head coach title. I think that would be something that would add a little bit more experience on that side of the ball. But otherwise, I think they've done a decent job, particularly given, the situation and some of the guys they may have missed on, and then some of the guys that they targeted to fit with the first-year head coach. So that's my take. Let's see. Let me scroll through a few of these guys, and then I got to go eat lunch, and I got some stories to write throughout the week. As always, guys, thank you guys for joining. We'll try to do this periodically throughout the off season. Let me know what stories you guys are interested in this fall season, so I'll spend more time as far as a little bit of offbeat stories, a little bit of feature stories. You'll see some of those coming in the next month or two. But if you guys have any interest, something that would appeal to you guys, shoot me a note, shoot me a message, and I'm always willing to attack something different. I've got a platform at ESPN that allows me to do whatever my mind will take me to. So the off season is somewhere where I can get out of the minutia of the beat, not really worried about why the inside linebacker is not playing on Sunday or something like that. So I think this is a fun time to sort of get into different ideas. I'll be churning on ideas, and I'm always willing to hear what the fans want to talk about. I know you guys want to hear about uniforms. Early April is what I'm hearing as far as when they'll announce those. But outside of that, let me guys know what you guys want to talk about or what you guys want to hear about. And hopefully I'll give you some stuff that you may not have expected and then some stuff that you guys want to know more about. So let's run a little bit through these questions, and I will get out of here. Lewis, what do you think we should do as far as a backup quarterback? Should we get a vet in free agency or draft one in the later rounds? Good question. And I think this is an underrated need for the Titans. It's something that I asked John Robinson when I was at the Senior Bowl in Mobile last week. And he sort of gave me the general manager answer, but he said that, hey, we got Matt Castle under contract, but this is something that we will look into. And he mentioned free agency. He didn't mention the draft, and maybe it was just a slip of his tongue and he didn't mention it, but he specifically mentioned free agency as an area where they'll evaluate their options there. I know that there can be bargains in free agency, but that's something you typically have to wait the later days, maybe the second or third week. Guys who don't get starter money is the area where I think the Titans will look at. Just remember, Case Keenum was a guy who signed late March for a 1-year, $2 million deal. And nobody pretty much paid attention to it, and he ended up being probably the bargain of the free agency class. So you look for a guy that you can find in that area. It's not easy, but I think the Titans should prioritize a backup quarterback. I don't think Matt Castle should be their number one backup quarterback going into the new season. So I think that you look at the free agency market, see if you can find you a good bargain, a guy who you can rely on, because Mariota hasn't finished the full season yet. So you have to be prepared for a game or two that you don't have him, like a Miami game. You have to be able to win those games. So I would love to see them get a top tier, a high-end backup quarterback. If you have to pay $7 million a year on a guy like that, maybe that's a bullet you have to swallow. The Eagles paid Nick Foles $7 million this year. And you think that's worth it? You think that's worth it? You see Nick Foles in the Super Bowl? I think that's the type of quarterback that you have to try to find out there. And I think free agency is probably your first and best bet. But it wouldn't be a bad deal to try to spend a mid-round pick on a developmental quarterback to be Mariota's long-term backup. I think that would be worth investing into. Quarterbacks are the key to this league, and you can never have enough of them going forward. So that's sort of how I look at that as. How aggressive do you Titans will be in free agency? I mentioned that earlier. I think John Robinson will be aggressive. That doesn't mean he's spending $100 million on guys, but I think you will see several free agent additions. I think you'll see him work the mid-tier market very well. That's sort of my feel. Uniform update. I said that early April. I think the Titans are going to have like some sort of preview where they're going to show them. I know they're suspected to start off-season workouts April 2nd. So I'm feeling like somewhere around that week, would make sense as far as a preview. So I'll keep you updated if I get an exact date on that. But as of now, that's sort of the time frame I'm thinking on the uniform. Let's see, Eddie. Yeah, Jags got a lot of guys under contract though and drafted. I mean, soon that the pay deal will come up, but I think they're in good shape right now. Um, let's see. Yeah, Ramsey gonna want his money. He's probably a top 3 cornerback in this league. So yeah. We'll talk more about free agency as we go along. Edwards, Tremont Johnson. You talking about Tremont Johnson? Um, but yeah, I saw the Reddit leak. I haven't heard anything about that. I don't know. I don't know, man. I know that they're excited about the uniform, and I will tell you guys as much as I know as it comes out. I don't want to get too much and try to confirm or deny whether some leak of a uniform is correct. So I think we'll get more information about that as we go forward. Um, yeah, I mean the issue why you didn't hear more about Tennessee scouting at the combine at the Senior Bowl is because they were scouting for coaches just as much as they were scouting for players. I know they met with several players at night. A lot of the meetings happen at night, but it's hard to get into draft coverage too much when there's a big coaching thing going on as far as coaching coordinators and coaching assistants. So I think that'll be something that we'll get into more as we get into February, March, and April. Long off season, a lot of time to talk football, a lot of time to talk Titans football. Thanks, Scott. Appreciate that. And as always, guys, thanks for tuning in. We'll talk soon.